everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us here for our November Policy Action meeting. As you know, we do these meetings on the third Thursday of each month at 1 p.m. And each month we try to take a deeper dive into some of the policy issues and legislation that's coming up that affects Pennsylvanians, whether that's our state government or whether that's things that are happening at the federal level. And we try to make this a combination of not just information, but also opportunities for folks to take action, to advocate for the kind of policies that we need here so that all Pennsylvanians can survive and thrive. I'm really excited today to be joined by my colleague, Adrienne Stanley, who's been helping us get folks into the room. We don't have her on screen here at the moment, but thank you to Adrienne for that. We are going to be taking questions and answer throughout the meeting. If you have a question, you can just type it in the chat and I can read it to our guests and have them give some thoughts about it. If you'd like, since we have a small enough meeting, we will set it up so that folks can raise their hand or unmute themselves directly and be able to ask a question. Oops, I think I just changed the setting on the security. Yeah, you can unmute yourself. Okay. Yeah, so that you can ask a question directly. I know sometimes they're more in-depth questions or they're follow-ups, so we do like to make it possible for folks to have a dialogue here in this meeting. I'm not going to take any more time today on this because we have some really interesting developments happening right now down on Capitol Hill related to the funding of our federal government. As you know, there's a lot in the news over the last number of days about the possibility that there might be a MAGA Republican-caused shutdown of the federal government and the devastating consequences that would have. We're going to get an update on kind of where things stand right now about whether or not we will see funding continue for our federal government and what the implications are of some of the ways that they might go about trying to keep the funding coming. On that note, I'm going to turn it over to our two guests here. I'll introduce both of them now and we'll kick it off first with Margarita George from Healthcare for America Now, where she is the executive director. Some of you know we've had her in on some of these calls before, and it's been really informative. We're looking forward to hearing from Margarita today. We also have with us Joe Battistelli from Coalition on Human Needs. Joe has also joined us in the past too. Both of these folks are very well informed about what's going on in the federal government, keeping an eye on it, have a lot of insights from their work over the years. We're really pleased that they're willing to bring their expertise here to share with us here in Pennsylvania. On that note, I'll turn it over to you, Marguerite.
Great. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. I don't usually get to deliver good news on calls. I'm at peace with it. It's just some people get to be the good news people. I'm rarely the good news person, but I will say there is good news. It's the bare minimum good. Honestly, because the bare minimum that we would expect is that members of Congress would go up to the Hill, go to work, do their jobs, keep the government running. That hasn't always been the case. But I think given all the turmoil on the Republican side and their many challenges with being able to find a speaker and keep a speaker, we're in a pretty good place. So earlier this week, the House passed a continuing resolution. So that's basically a status quo a bill that would keep funding at the levels that it is right now, preventing a government shutdown. They passed, the House passed that on Tuesday. Interestingly, we're in this very interesting kind of wacko situation where the Republicans have a majority in the House of Representatives, but they actually can't pass any bills without Democrats. And so we're in this very odd situation in which we're in a hyper polarized political context where only bipartisan bills can pass, because without Democrats, Republicans literally cannot pass a bill. And so when you look at their vote count earlier this week, the House, the new Speaker of the House, who's been in his position in just a couple of weeks, that's Speaker Mike Johnson, has said from the beginning, from the time that he started in that role, that he wasn't looking for a government shutdown. That's good. It's much better than having a speaker who's ideologically committed to disruption and shutdown. So he hasn't wanted a government shutdown, but wrangling his caucus is really challenging. He's got 5-6 different factions of Republicans within his caucus. They all want different things. And there's certainly enough Republicans in the Republican caucus right now that wouldn't mind shutting down the government and actually would favor that as an approach, a disruptive approach. that it becomes very difficult to unify Republicans around an agenda. And for that reason, what we're seeing is really historical. Republicans can't even pass their own bills. They can't even pass a defense bill on the floor, and they control the House of Representatives. So pretty crazy. If it wasn't so terrible for democracy and so devastating for policy, it would be pretty funny, I think. But, it's too dangerous to be funny. So they passed their bill. Actually, a majority of their votes were Democratic votes, 336 to 95. Most of the no votes were Republican no votes. I think all but 2 were Republicans voting no on the bill. Mostly Republicans who voted no on the bill voted no on that bill because A, they don't want to cooperate with Democrats, and B, they wanted much deeper spending cuts. What's important to understand is that the CR that the Republicans passed on the floor already has deeper cuts than the cuts that were agreed to with the president and the previous speaker just, 5 or 6 months ago. That bill went over to the Senate. Now, yesterday when I was talking to people, and the House bill had gone over to the Senate because it's got to pass the Senate in order to then be passed into law and keep the government open. The government shutdown deadline is the 17th, so we're almost there. I thought, okay, well, it's going to go over there. And I mean, the Senate, one thing that you learn, I think Joe would agree with me on this, when you do a lot of work around Congress, is that if they can do something that puts them up against a deadline versus not, they will always choose to go up against the deadline. I mean, if you think you have a procrastination problem, you really ain't seen nothing until you've seen the United States Congress at work. But actually, they didn't do that. I think it's because they are so eager to get out of Washington, D.C. and go home for Thanksgiving. I thought they were going to be debating this today and voting on it today. They really didn't. Last night, they went through the whole process. There were a couple of challenging moments, one from Senator Paul, which is expected these days, and then one from Senator Wicker, who wants to have a specific kind of process around the NDAA. But the Senate passed the bill. They passed it pretty handily, 87 to 11 on the CR. So that's good. Now that bill goes to the president. The president will sign off on the bill in plenty of time. Certainly. I mean, I feel like so luxurious to have a whole day and a half of latitude here. Usually it's like a half hour. So the president will sign off on the CR and there will not be a government shutdown. That's great. For those of you guys that are traveling, if anybody's flying for the holidays, you should be especially happy, because one thing you might have been reading in your local news, and we've read a lot of it here in the DMV area, is how problematic it would be to not be paying TSA agents in airports during the busiest travel week of the year. And probably the busiest travel day since COVID started years ago. So that's great. So I would just say the reason I think of this as being sort of a bare minimum victory is we kept the government open, and that's really important for millions of people that deserve, depend on services, whose jobs we're talking about. But there's a lot of unresolved issues, and Joe's going to talk about what some of the unresolved issues are going to be, but I want to mention a couple of things. So lest you think that this is all these guys have to do, and that when they get back the week after Thanksgiving, they're not going to have anything to do, they will still have plenty to do. And I just want to mention a few things. One is that Speaker Johnson has said no more CRs. So no more of these stopgap continuing resolutions. His intent is to come to agreement around a 2024 budget, which is a very challenging prospect because, as I said, his own party has not been successful in passing bills. To get to a 2024 budget, you have to pass all of the appropriations bills. There's 12. It's pretty late in the year, and they haven't passed all 12 yet. And they haven't, in fact, just Wednesday, one of his rules got defeated in the Rules Committee, which is supposed to work at the pleasure of the speaker. So lots of problems with Republican unity that will make it very challenging to get to a 2024 budget. 2, there's pretty significant disagreement between the House and the Senate on what the top line number should be for the budget. The Senate has passed all 12 of their appropriations bills, the 12 bills that make up the budget, and they have passed them in accordance with the deal that President Biden made with the first Republican speaker, McCarthy, who's not the speaker anymore. And so the question is, they sort of followed the rules. The House off the rails, right? They passed spending bills that had much deeper cuts than what was agreed to with the president. And so getting those two bills to come together, reconciling those two sets of numbers is tremendously challenging, but it's going to have to be done in order to get to a 2024 budget. So huge problem there. Third thing, there are other programs, issues, there's other stuff that needs to get done that can't wait until the new deadline. So the CR that passed yesterday and is being signed into law today essentially extends the agreement to fund government for another couple of months. So, and there's 2 steps to that CR, and the first piece of it expires January 19th. January 19th might seem like it's far away, but remember, between now and the end of the year, legislators only have 21 legislative days. They're only going to be meeting for 21 days, right? Less than a month. So that is not very long to get to an agreement. Keep in mind, they've been debating all year and haven't gotten to an agreement. So getting there in 21 days, pretty challenging. The second part 2 of that expires on February 2nd. So they're going to need to get to an agreement by that earlier deadline on a 2024 budget. And getting to an agreement on a 2024 budget, when the House and the Senate don't agree, the Republicans are divided amongst themselves, hugely challenging. And remember, this is not the only thing on their to-do list. In addition, there are going to be some things that they have to do before the end of the year, aside from the budget, that are critical backstop things. One is the approval of the reauthorization of the NDAA. That's the big defense bill. Honestly, never been that big of an issue in the past. For 61 years, the NDAA has been reauthorized with bipartisan support. Not so much anymore. Again, Republicans are divided amongst themselves. Huge bill. They're going to have to come to agreement. There's the FAA reauthorization. That's the Federal Aviation Administration. So they have other things that they have to do. And I haven't even mentioned the stuff that Joe's going to talk about. There's other things that they have to do before the end of the year that are not specifically tied to the budget. So that's important to remember. And then the final thing I would say is that in addition to their sort of political challenges, the fact that they have other things that they have to do besides the budget, and the discrepancy between the House and the Senate, there is going to be ratcheted up pressure because of outside conditions, right? And by that, I mean the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel. There's going to be all these contextual factors that are really pushing for more urgent action. So a lot of the things that they've put off, including the president's supplemental request, the president requested another 100 billion or so for foreign aid, for border control, for all these various things that these guys haven't even debated yet, right? It's been no go anywhere. But those issues are going to come to the forefront, and all of that has to get resolved essentially in the next 21 days to 35 days that are coming between now and January 19th. So it's quite a lot to do for a set of people who almost can't stand to be in the same room together in a pretty short period of time. I guess I just gave away the rosy. I guess I just negated the good news. I wanted to be the spreader of the good news. I did spread the good news at the beginning, but now I've moved on to the bad news. Sorry. Joe won't have anything good either. Joe won't have any good news either. Joe, take it away. Sorry.
Way to go to your baser instincts, MJ.
I know, it's evolved quickly, didn't it? Oh my God.
I'll just say you're fitting in very well here. We're kind of known here at Pennsylvania Policy Center for kind of bumming people out, because we also have to talk about our state government. So,
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
So you heard MJ's kind of like update of what just happened and what that kind of directly lays us out for. I'm going to bring up 5 more items and I'm going to go through them, and then we can return to any of this for questions, comments, answers, stuff like that. One is a supplemental. The second is appropriations, which we still need to do, even though there was a CR, a farm bill, a tax package, and a debt commission. And I'm going to take them in order because roughly that is chronologically how these things will hit us. In the most immediate way, there is need for a supplemental or extra appropriation of money for certain policies and programs by Congress. From our perspective, this needs to happen by the end of the year. These are for programs and policies that are burning through money, that were not given any more money in the continuing resolution and desperately need it. Chiefly among them, I'm going to highlight three, which is WIC, which under the CR has the authority to continue going through money that it has on hand as fast or as slow as it needs to. But with an uptick of enrollment in WIC, they're not going to make it to the end of the CR. They will need more money to keep serving the wonderful and doing the wonderful work that they do to support nutrition and infant and maternal health. Another is the care economy, specifically like Head Start programs, VA stuff that are just, they're expensive programs. They're wonderful, good programs, but they need money. And then being in Pennsylvania, this won't surprise you, but winter's cold, and energy assistance is a needed and necessary program that is funded through a program called LIHEAP, which I believe you're all familiar with. And if you're not, we can go through that, of course. All of this needs a supplemental. All of this needs to happen before the end of the year. And none of this can wait. The dangers of this, though, is that the House has been trying to finagle a trade, because that's all the domestic supplemental needs. Foreign supplemental needs, which I don't really work on, but include aid for Ukraine, aid for Israel, and a couple other bucket items. And there's trying to be a deal either about how to fund these supplemental things by taking money back from the IRS, which would actually cause the deficit to balloon because the IRS needs money to collect money, or enact very horrible policy changes at our border, which, regardless of what you think about the border crisis, these are human beings, and we need to follow basic human rights and treat these people humanely. The next stop on our wonderful tour is just general approach. The government, as MJ said, is in a laddered CR. The first deadline will be January 19th. These are generally the uncontroversial, mostly agreed upon pieces of legislation for funding our government. Veterans Affairs, Legislative Affairs, military construction. And there are some riders that need to be worked out between the House and Senate. There's definitely some things to watch there, but they're generally more non-controversial ones. Where our community needs to be much more aware of is on February 2nd, they're going to take up Homeland Security and Defense on one side, and then Commerce, Justice, Science, and Labor, HHS, and Agriculture. And those three, the House has not been able to even have their own vote. The House Republicans can't agree with the House Republicans, as MJ said. But the riders, the reason they can't agree with themselves, the riders and policy changes and funding changes that they're putting into those bills would cause incredible harm to our community. Examples of this are zeroing out the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor. And that's $25 million that's supposed to address inequities in our workforce and expand labor opportunities for women. The carrot is that, and what was the small win is that having DoD spending and having DHS spending also go with that group, it gives us leverage, because if they want to get to DoD spending, they're going to have to get through Commerce, Justice, Science, through Labor, HHS, through education, through other things like that. And again, that's February 2nd. So now we have 2 more opportunities for a deadlock. And as MJ said, Johnson said, there will be no more CRs. So we better negotiate and negotiate well. The third thing I'm going to put forward is that there is a tax package that's being talked about quietly on Capitol Hill. This tax package would give what the business community wants, which is a bunch of business tax credits that either expired at the end of last year or are going to expire at the end of this year, in exchange for an expansion on the child tax credit. Now, the child tax credit is something we expanded during COVID and dramatically decreased poverty among the entire United States and lifted over 3 million children out of poverty. That expansion ended and those children were put back into poverty. So this might be an actual opportunity to do some real good for a lot of children and their families. The question is just, what is it going to take us to get to that deal? And we can go into more details if you guys want or have questions. The next is the Farm Bill. Under the current passed CR, which is about to be signed by Biden, the current Farm Bill was extended for about a year. And that's great. But as Pennsylvania with a lot of farms in it knows that the Farm Bill does need to be updated. The farm insurance and reimbursement amounts and various other provisions are woefully out of date considering inflation, and farmers do need a farm bill. There is bipartisan interest in not letting this go for another full year, in that we would want to address this sooner rather than later. Probably not until the new year, but it's something to keep on your radar because there's also opportunities to make gains in food security and anti-hunger programs and possibly some labor issues. I'm sure you guys all saw the articles about children working in meat packing plants at 3 a.m. And so there's some interest in adding to the Farm Bill to address some of these horrible circumstances that low-income people are finding themselves in without worker protections. And then the last, and this is possibly the most dangerous, Speaker Johnson and certain parts of the House Republican Party and their friends on the Senate side to some extent want to explore what's called a debt commission. I'm not sure how long all of you guys have been doing this, but the word Simpson Bowles might mean something to you. The last time we had a debt commission, it ended up doing recommendations that harmed human needs programs. This is no different. They might say that this is an opportunity to tackle our mounting debt. They might say that they're willing to talk about new revenues to make sure that the rich and powerful pay their fair share. Do not believe them. The revenues somehow never make it into law, and the recommended cuts are always fall on the most vulnerable people in our country. We have to watch what they're considering. We have to voice our opposition to it. Do not give them an inch on this. Those are the 5 things that are going to happen between now and early next year. I don't know the timeline. No one knows how quickly or if at all a supplemental will come together this year. We have Thanksgiving break, and then very quickly the House and Senate are going to want to break for the New Year and Christmas. And that's because they all want to get home so that they can start their campaign season. We're headed into an election year, don't forget. And nothing, as hard as it is to get government to function during an off year, doing it during election and asking these people to make hard votes or what should just be seen as their normal job is always even harder. The only thing for sure is that on January 19th, half of our government's going to shut down if they don't do anything. And then 2 weeks later, on February 2nd, the other half will too. That's what we're facing. I wish I had better news for you. Do you guys have, if you have questions or comments or concerns or other things, this is what's in front of us. What I would like to, unless you have questions now, we can take them. But in the meantime, what MJ and I would like to convey to you is there will be opportunities where your voices will absolutely critically matter. We don't know when yet, and that's the problem. We don't have a calendar yet. But we urge you to stay engaged. We urge you to, I know you will have priorities at your state level, and those are needed and worthy of your primary attention, but I urge you to check in, raise your voice, and make sure your federal delegation knows that you guys are watching.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thank you, Margarita. Yeah, Jeff just pointed out in the chat here that Glenn Thompson has a really kind of key role on the Agriculture Committee as the chair. And obviously he's someone who will get a lot of attention from folks here, both in the agriculture community and also in the food insecurity response network that we've got across the state. Let me pause here and see if we have any questions from anybody. I'll just say, if you want to just unmute yourself and ask directly, or click on the raised hand icon, we can just open up the mic for that. Any questions?
So much good news. I'm surprised you guys don't want to celebrate.
Well, this is.
So I've got a
There we
question.
go.
I think you may have mentioned this. I'm sorry, I got on late. I had a business call I had to take. I recently read something about the need to renew federal law with regard to health centers, federally qualified health centers. Did you guys mention that? If not, can you fill us in about it?
Yeah, I can. So the community health centers, this is a little bit like the WIC thing that Joe was just talking about. So the challenge for community health centers is that they're businesses, right? And they have to plan ahead. And for community health centers, they're really vulnerable because a quarter of their funding comes from the federal government. The really dysfunctional funding, the like dysfunctional appropriations process means that community health centers often don't know how much money they're going to have until they're actually in the quarter that they're supposed to be planning for. And of course, if you're following all the stuff on health staffing and the huge challenges with staffing healthcare facilities, right? We just had the biggest healthcare strike in history, the Kaiser Permanente strike, 75,000 workers out on strike. This creates a huge, huge problem for these centers. They can't plan ahead when the mechanism for their funding is a continuing resolution, right? Like, so imagine if you're running a community health center and you literally at this moment, you're looking at your budget for 2024, but at this moment you don't know anything about the 2024 budget, except you're going to have money through the 19th. Through December 19th, but you can't tell what else is going to happen. That would mean that you couldn't add any services. You couldn't guarantee continuation of the services that you have. You can't really hire any staff. Some of your staff might feel like, this seems a little bit uncertain. Maybe I'm going to quit. Once staff quit, it's very hard to get them back in healthcare right now because staffing is such a crisis. So the dysfunction in the political process that has made budgets, which used to be a really routine thing for the federal government to come up with a budget every year. The budget process is so dysfunctional that community health centers, WIC, and other programs that are pretty heavily dependent on federal funding for their operations, it has made them completely vulnerable and just impeded their ability to function normally, their ability to staff, their ability to provide services, their ability to expand services. And I'll just give one quick example. You guys might have seen this article in the New York Times about the drug crisis, the addiction crisis, and the New York Times reporter was really making a pitch to stop talking about the opioid crisis and to really talk about the addiction crisis, because most people that are addicted to opioid are also addicted to meth or, some other type of medicine. Some other type of drug, and we don't really have a comprehensive approach to that. So we may have done a good job in some places at making Narcan more available for opioid overdoses, but that's a pretty limited approach when that person who is an opioid user and the opioids make them sleepy, and so they may also be homeless and they're taking meth to stay awake so they don't get attacked on the street. We have nothing to offer them on the meth addiction. So community health centers, which are really a primary place where people get their first treatment for mental health / substance abuse, they're not able to expand those services, even though we have a growing need in the addiction community, because the government funding doesn't facilitate it. If a quarter of their funding is contingent upon what the federal government does and being able to have actually steady, stable funding, they can't open up new clinics. They can't provide mobile services. They can't do any of those things because there's no predictability in terms of whether or not that funding is going to continue, while the mechanism for funding government is just continuing resolutions. It's not actual budget. So, we see that in a lot of programs. It's tremendously challenging when you have these folks providing what are really essential services.
Thanks.
Thanks, Margarita. Thanks for the question, Mark. That was really helpful to clarify that. I'm going to go to Jeff next. Jeff has a question or comment.
Yeah, this is Jeff Eisman from Pennsylvania Silk. Yeah, just to follow up on the health centers. Yeah, I'll tell our friend Eric Keel that some folks fought for or fighting for them. A lot of us work with them on rural healthcare needs, and they're particularly helpful for people with disabilities. On dental care is another issue where, particularly in rural areas, it's very hard to find dentists that take Medicaid. My question is actually on the FAA reauthorization, because they have some provisions in there related to people with disabilities, particularly in terms of including addressing some of the challenges we've had with durable medical equipment, which I've had actually somebody just recently passed. I'm thinking of them now. They actually, from them flying out to Utah and their power wheelchair got destroyed. We've had a number of others that have had those types of challenges with assistive technology and things like that, where basically the airlines aren't very good in some of the FAA reauthorization policies. I don't know if you could comment on anything on the FAA reauthorization. The last I saw, it's good through the end of December, but Congress hasn't agreed across the board to it. It was over in the Senate, I think, before the last short-term fix. Thanks.
I will say that I don't have much. I mean, MJ, maybe you've heard something that I haven't, but I haven't heard anything beyond what you have. I know that, like you said, it's good to the end of the year. I know that there's been a very strong push at the national level with the disability advocacy community to get those provisions in. Those provisions are widely, but not universally, kind of agreed to already. There are certain not good actors, frankly, that are pushing kind of against it. But I don't think the provisions are the issue. The reauthorization bill itself that those provisions are riding in has yet to make any headway from my understanding. And that's, I mean, kind of like MJ was talking about, getting Congress right now to do basic stuff is a slog. But I would also imagine that the Christmas travel rush is probably going to light a fire under their butt to at least reauthorize. But, I have been wrong about my predictions before.
Haven't we all?
So you mean maybe on January 2nd, stranded travelers all across the country will get them to act, to come rush back home if they can rush back to DC if they can actually get there and take action, right?
That, and every presidential candidate still trying to get their butt to Iowa. Yeah.
That's right.
That's true.
To say, as somebody who's flying back to the country on New Year's Eve and landing on New Year's Day, my fingers crossed on this one. So.
Yeah, that may help get it done. Yeah, we work with the National Council on Independent Living, NCIL, NICO. I don't know if you're familiar with them. So that's who. And we work with a couple others, AAPD, American Association of People with Disabilities, on some issues nationally. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for your question, Jeff, and thanks for helping to clarify that a bit, Joe. Other questions, comments from anyone? Okay, well, I think we've wrapped up with the questions. We do try to keep these under 45 minutes, so we are coming in right on time here. I want to thank our guests, Margarita and Joe, for joining us here today, for giving us the good news, but also telling us the truth about some of the very kind of nerve-wracking things that are coming up in the next few weeks, and the importance of really speaking out to our members of Congress, our congressional delegation about this is one of the suggestions we would have for how folks can take action. I will note that we do these policy action Zoom meetings on the third Thursday of each month. We'll be getting some information out to folks. If you joined us a little bit later after the meeting started, we will have the recording available. We'll probably also put that up on our YouTube channel fairly quickly. You can go back there and find that if you'd like to. We'll also get some information out soon about saving the date for our next meeting, which on schedule would be the third Thursday of December. We're already thinking a bit about some of the things we may want to be talking about when we get to that point in the calendar year. On that note, thank you again, Joe and Margarita. Thank you to all of you for taking the time today to join us, to stay informed and to stay active in speaking out on the kind of policy issues that really impact the lives of so many people, not just in Pennsylvania, but across the country.